The fever took hold of Beatrice Morrison, just as the wagon train prepared to pull out from the dusty camping spot near the Platte River in Nebraska Territory. And within hours, she went from feeling slightly warm to burning up with such intensity that she could barely open her eyes. "Please," her father begged the wagon master, a grizzled man named Samuel Hicks who had led trains across the plains for 15 years. "Just one more day. She needs rest." Hicks shook his head, his weathered face showing no mercy beneath the brim of his hat. "We are already behind schedule. It is late May of 1867, and we need to cross the mountains before the first snows. One sick woman cannot hold up 40 families." "She is my daughter," William Morrison said, his voice breaking. "And I have responsibilities to everyone else," Hicks replied. "You can stay behind if you want, but the train moves at dawn." Beatrice heard all of this through a haze of pain and heat. She was 20 years old, and this journey west was supposed to be her chance at a new life after losing her intended husband in the war. Now she was the reason her family might be stranded in the middle of nowhere, vulnerable to weather, wild animals, and worse. "Go," she whispered to her father that night as he sat beside her in the wagon, his face drawn with worry. "Take mother and the little ones. Go." "I will not leave you," he said firmly. "You have to." She gripped his hand with what little strength she had. "Thomas is only 8. Mary is 6. They need you. I am grown. I will catch up when I am better." Her mother wept, but Beatrice could see the terrible calculation in her parents' eyes. 5 children, and Beatrice was the eldest. The younger ones needed their parents more. "There is a ranch about 5 miles back," her father said slowly. "I spoke with a cowboy watering his horse at the river yesterday, the Franklin place. Maybe they would take you in until you are well enough to join another train." The decision was made in those desperate hours before dawn. They left her with water, food, blankets, and a small tent. Her father pressed money into her hand and promised to send word back once they reached Oregon. Her mother sobbed as she kissed Beatrice's burning forehead. Then the wagons rolled out, and Beatrice was alone. She drifted in and out of consciousness as the sun rose higher. The fever made everything feel distant and strange. She thought she heard voices at one point, thought she saw a figure on horseback, but she could not be sure what was real and what was delirium. When she finally opened her eyes with some clarity, she found herself staring up at the canvas roof of her tent. A cool cloth rested on her forehead, and she could hear someone moving around outside. "Hello." Her voice came out as barely a croak. The tent flap opened, and a man ducked inside. He was young, maybe 24 or 25, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of a summer sky. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, and he had the lean, strong build of someone who worked hard for a living. "You are awake," he said, and his voice was gentle despite his rough appearance. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was trampled by a horse," Beatrice admitted. "Who are you?" "Kevin Franklin," he said. "My family owns a ranch a few miles west of here. I was riding fence lines when I saw your tent. That was 2 days ago." 2 days. Beatrice struggled to sit up, and Kevin quickly helped her, arranging the blankets so she could lean back comfortably. "The fever broke this morning," he explained. "You have been pretty sick. I have been bringing you water and broth, trying to keep the fever down." He looked away, a slight flush creeping up his neck. "I hope you do not mind. I know it is not proper, but there was no one else." "You saved my life," Beatrice said quietly. The realization of how vulnerable she had been, how easily she could have died alone in this tent, washed over her. "Thank you." "Your family?" Kevin asked carefully. "Gone with the wagon train." She explained what had happened, and as she spoke, she watched his face. Most men would have shown judgment or pity, but Kevin just listened, nodding occasionally. That must have been a hard choice for them, he said when she finished. It was the right choice. They have the younger children to think about. Kevin was quiet for a moment, then said, "My mother died when I was 16. My father passed last year. It is just me and my younger brother Keith now, running the ranch. It is not much, just a few hundred head of cattle and some horses, but we get by." He met her eyes. "You are welcome to stay with us until you are strong enough to decide what you want to do. We have a spare room in the house." "I cannot impose like that," Beatrice protested, even as relief flooded through her. "It is not an imposition," Kevin said firmly. "Out here, people help each other. It is the only way to survive." Over the next few days, Kevin moved Beatrice to the ranch. The Franklin place was modest but well-maintained, with a sturdy wooden house, a barn, and several outbuildings. Keith Franklin turned out to be 19, with the same dark hair as his brother but a more reserved manner. He nodded politely to Beatrice, but mostly kept to himself. The spare room was small but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the prairie. After weeks of sleeping in a wagon, it felt like luxury. Beatrice recovered slowly. Kevin brought her meals and sat with her in the evenings, and they talked about everything and nothing. She learned that he had been born in Missouri, but came west with his parents when he was 12, chasing the dream of land and opportunity. He told her about the ranch, about the hard work and the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. She told him about her life before the war, about growing up in Pennsylvania, about her fiancé who had died at Gettysburg. She had not spoken about Thomas in years, but somehow it felt safe to tell Kevin. He listened without trying to fix anything or offer empty platitudes. "I am sorry," he said simply when she finished. "That is a heavy thing to carry." "I thought going west would help me leave it behind," Beatrice admitted. "Start fresh." "Maybe it still can," Kevin said. Within 2 weeks, Beatrice was well enough to help around the house. She insisted on earning her keep, and Kevin did not argue. She cooked meals, mended clothes, kept the house clean. It felt good to be useful again, to have purpose. She also started to notice things about Kevin. The way he was always gentle with the horses. How he would come in from a long day of work exhausted and dusty, but would still take time to fix a loose board on the porch or repair a broken chair. The way he never complained, just did what needed doing. And she noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention. There was something in those glances that made her heart beat faster. One evening in late June, she was in the kitchen preparing supper when Kevin came in from checking on a mare that was due to foal any day. He washed his hands in the basin and then stood awkwardly in the doorway. "Beatrice," he said, "I have been thinking." She turned to face him, her hands still dusted with flour from the biscuits she was making. "About what?" "About you staying here. Permanently, I mean." He took a breath, clearly nervous. "I know you have been thinking about joining another wagon train when one comes through, but I was wondering if maybe you might consider staying instead." "Kevin, I cannot just live here indefinitely," Beatrice said gently. "People would talk." "I know. That is why I am asking if you would consider marrying me." The words hung in the air between them. Beatrice felt her heart hammering in her chest. "You want to marry me?" "I know it is fast," Kevin said quickly. "I know we have only known each other a few weeks. And I know I am just a rancher with more debts than assets right now. But I care about you, Beatrice. I think I started caring about you that first day when I found you sick and alone and still trying to be brave about it." He took a step closer. "I am not asking you to love me right now. I am just asking if you might be willing to build a life here and see what happens." Beatrice looked at this man who had shown her nothing but kindness, who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. She thought about the alternative, about trying to catch up to her family or joining another wagon train, about arriving in Oregon alone and trying to start over in a strange place where she knew no one. But more than that, she thought about how she felt when Kevin was near, how safe she felt, how something that had been frozen inside her since Thomas died was slowly starting to thaw. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." Kevin's face lit up with a smile that transformed him. "Really?" "Really," she confirmed. And then he was crossing the kitchen and taking her hands in his, flour and all, and looking at her like she was something precious. They were married 3 days later by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through the area. Keith stood as witness, along with a neighboring rancher and his wife. Beatrice wore her best dress, which was not very impressive after months on the trail, but Kevin looked at her like she was wearing silk and lace. The ceremony was simple, just words spoken in the front room of the ranch house, but when Kevin slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and kissed her gently, Beatrice felt something shift deep inside her. This was real. This was her life now. That night, lying beside her new husband in the darkness of their room, Beatrice felt nervous and uncertain. Kevin seemed to sense her hesitation. "We can take this as slow as you need," he said softly. "I meant what I said before. I am not asking you to love me yet. I just want you to be happy." She turned to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the darkness. "What if I told you I think I could love you, eventually?" "Then I would say I am already halfway there with you," Kevin admitted, "and I would be patient as long as it takes for you to catch up." She kissed him then, tentative at first, but he responded with a tenderness that made her feel cherished. They took things slowly that night, learning each other, and while it was not perfect, it was sweet and careful and kind. The summer passed in a rhythm of work and slowly deepening affection. Beatrice learned the routines of ranch life. She tended the vegetable garden behind the house, coaxing tomatoes and beans and squash from the rich soil. She learned to milk the cow and gather eggs from the chickens. She helped Kevin and Keith with the horses, discovering she had a knack for the work. Kevin taught her to ride properly, not just sitting in a wagon but really riding. They would go out in the evening sometimes, just the two of them, riding across the open prairie as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. On one of these rides, they stopped beside a creek to let the horses drink. Kevin helped Beatrice down from her mount, and his hands lingered on her waist for a moment longer than necessary. "I love you," he said suddenly, the words tumbling out like he had been holding them back for a long time. "I know I said I would not ask for it, but I cannot help it. I love you, Beatrice." She looked up at him, at this man who had become the center of her world without her quite realizing when it happened. "I love you too," she said, and knew it was true, completely, undeniably true. He kissed her there beside the creek, and it felt like a promise of all the days to come. By August, they had fallen into the comfortable patterns of a real marriage. Beatrice moved through the house with confidence now, knowing exactly where everything was and how Kevin liked things done. She had made curtains for the windows and planted flowers beside the front porch. She had turned the house into a home, but life on a ranch was not without its challenges. In early September, a drought that had been threatening all summer finally took hold. The grass turned brown and brittle, and the cattle grew thin. Kevin spent long days riding out to check water sources, his face lined with worry. "We might have to sell some of the herd," he told Beatrice one night, lying in bed with his arm around her. "We cannot feed them all if this drought keeps up." "We will figure it out," she said, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "We will get through it together." And they did. Kevin sold 30 head of cattle to a buyer passing through, getting a decent price that would see them through the winter. It hurt to see the herd reduced, but it was the smart thing to do. Keith, who had been quiet and distant when Beatrice first arrived, started to warm up to her as the months passed. He began joining them for supper instead of taking his food to the bunkhouse, and sometimes he would even smile at her jokes. "Thank you," he said to her one day as they were working together in the garden, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables before the first frost. "For taking care of Kevin, and for not trying to replace our mother." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "I would never try to do that, but I am glad we can be family." As autumn turned the prairie grasses gold and russet, Beatrice began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited a few weeks to be sure before telling Kevin, wanting to be certain. When she finally told him on a crisp October evening, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he said, setting her down gently like she was made of glass. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, even though his face made the answer obvious. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Kevin said, cupping her face in his hands. "You have given me so much, Beatrice. A home, a real home, not just a house. And now this." The winter was hard, as winters always were on the plains. Snow fell heavy and deep, and there were days when they could not leave the house. Kevin and Keith had to dig paths to the barn to care for the animals, and keeping the house warm was a constant battle. But inside, there was warmth and love. Kevin was constantly attentive to Beatrice, making sure she was comfortable and had everything she needed. He would sit with her in the evenings, his hand resting on her growing belly, talking to the baby about the ranch and the life they would build together. "Do you ever regret it?" Beatrice asked him one snowy night as they lay in bed, the wind howling outside. "Marrying me so quickly." Taking on a stranger, Kevin propped himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "Not for a single second. Beatrice, finding you that day was the best thing that ever happened to me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though I was half dead with fever and causing you nothing but trouble," he smiled and kissed her softly. "Especially then. You needed help, and I got to be the one to give it, and then I got to watch you bloom into yourself here. I got to watch you fall in love with this place, with this life." He paused. "With me." "That was the easiest part," she admitted, threading her fingers through his. "Falling in love with you." Spring came slowly, the snow melting to reveal the brown earth beneath. By April, green shoots were pushing up through the soil, and the cattle were moving easier, no longer struggling through deep drifts. Beatrice's belly had grown round and full, and she moved with the careful waddle of a woman in her final weeks of pregnancy. Kevin hardly let her do anything, insisting she rest and let him and Keith handle everything. "I am pregnant, not dying," she protested one morning when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know, but I worry," he said, taking the basket from her hands. "What if you overdo it?" "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," Beatrice pointed out. "I am not made of porcelain." But she let him help anyway because the truth was she was tired and her back ached, and the baby was sitting heavy and low. On a warm day in late April 1868, almost exactly a year after she had been left behind by the wagon train, Beatrice's labor began. Kevin rode for the neighbor woman, Mrs. Patterson, who had experience with birthing babies, and then he paced outside the bedroom door for 12 long hours while Beatrice labored. When Mrs. Patterson finally opened the door, her face was weary but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Franklin. A big, healthy boy." Kevin rushed into the room to find Beatrice propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a squirming bundle wrapped in blankets. Her hair was damp with sweat, and she looked like she had been through a battle, but her eyes were shining. "Meet your son," she said softly. Kevin approached almost reverently, looking down at the tiny red face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making small, mewling sounds. "He is perfect," Kevin breathed. "You are perfect." They named him William Thomas Franklin, after Beatrice's father and her first love. Kevin understood why she wanted to honor both men, and he did not feel threatened by the ghost of Thomas anymore. He knew Beatrice loved him, had chosen him, was building a life with him. Little Will, as they called him, was a good baby for the most part. He nursed well and slept in reasonable stretches, though the first few months were still exhausting. Kevin helped as much as he could, walking the floor with Will when he fussed at night, changing diapers, doing whatever Beatrice needed. Keith was surprisingly smitten with his nephew. He would come in from working and go straight to wherever the baby was, making faces and cooing at him. Beatrice often found him sitting in the rocking chair with Will sleeping on his chest, looking content in a way she had never seen before. As Will grew from a newborn into a chubby, smiling infant, life on the ranch continued its steady rhythm. Kevin worked hard to build up the herd again after the drought losses. He bought good breeding stock and made smart decisions about which cattle to sell and which to keep. Beatrice managed the household and cared for Will, but she also continued to work alongside Kevin when she could. She had become a true ranch wife, capable and strong, able to rope a calf or mend a fence as well as cook a meal or sew a shirt. "I never imagined this life," she told Kevin one summer evening as they sat on the porch, watching Will play in the dirt with some wooden blocks Kevin had carved for him. "When I was a girl in Pennsylvania, I thought I would marry a shopkeeper or a clerk, live in town, have a proper parlor." "Do you miss it?" Kevin asked, reaching over to take her hand. "Not even a little bit," Beatrice said honestly. "This life is hard, but it is real, it matters. Everything we do here has purpose." Will learned to walk the following spring, toddling around the ranch yard on unsteady legs while Kevin watched with a protective eye. He was talking too, calling Beatrice Mama and Kevin Papa in his high, sweet voice. In the summer of 1870, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she was more confident about the whole process, though Kevin was just as nervous and protective as he had been the first time. Their second child, a daughter they named Caroline Ruth, was born in February of 1871. She had Beatrice's light brown hair and Kevin's blue eyes, and she was smaller and more delicate than Will had been. Kevin fell completely in love with his daughter from the moment he held her. He would sit for hours just looking at her tiny face, marveling at her perfect little fingers and toes. "She is going to break hearts someday," he said to Beatrice one night. "Not for a very long time," Beatrice replied firmly. "She is going to stay my baby girl forever." But of course she did not stay a baby. Caroline grew into a lively toddler, following her older brother everywhere and demanding to be included in everything he did. Will was patient with her for the most part, though he sometimes got frustrated when she knocked down his block towers or tangled his rope. The ranch was thriving now. Kevin had built the herd up to nearly 400 head, and he had bought more land from a neighbor who was giving up and moving back east. They had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, and there was talk of building a bigger barn. Keith had fallen in love with a girl from a neighboring ranch, a sweet, quiet thing named Margaret Simmons. They were married in the summer of 1872, and Keith built a small house on the far side of the property for him and his bride. "I am glad he found someone," Beatrice said to Kevin as they watched the newlyweds drive away after the wedding celebration. "He deserves to be happy." "We all do," Kevin agreed, pulling her close. "And I am. Every single day with you makes me happy." Life continued to unfold in seasons of work and joy. Will grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved the ranch and the cattle. Caroline was more social and dramatic, always telling elaborate stories and putting on shows for anyone who would watch. In 1874, Beatrice gave birth to twin boys, Jonathan and Samuel. Kevin was beside himself with excitement and terror at having two babies at once. The first few months were exhausting, with both babies needing to be fed and changed around the clock, but they managed with help from Margaret and Mrs. Patterson. The twins were identical in looks but different in temperament. Jonathan was calm and easy, content to lie in his cradle and watch the world. Samuel was fussy and demanding, always wanting to be held and making his displeasure known when he was not the center of attention. "He takes after his mother," Kevin joked one night when Samuel was crying yet again. "I am not fussy," Beatrice protested, but she was smiling. Will, now 6 years old, was a big help with his younger siblings. He would sit with Caroline and keep her entertained while Beatrice tended to the twins, and he was gentle and careful when he held his baby brothers. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Kevin was known throughout the territory as a fair dealer and a good rancher. Other ranchers would come to him for advice, and he had developed a reputation for raising quality cattle. In 1876, when the twins were toddling around and getting into everything, Beatrice found herself pregnant again. She was 30 years old now, and the pregnancies were getting harder, but she and Kevin both wanted a large family. Their youngest child, a daughter they named Rose Ellen, was born in January of 1877. She was the smallest of all their babies, and for a few scary days after her birth, it was unclear if she would survive. But she was a fighter, and she pulled through, growing stronger every day. "5 children," Kevin said one night after Rose was finally sleeping soundly in her cradle. "We have 5 children. Are you complaining?" Beatrice asked, settling into bed beside him with a tired sigh. "Not at all," Kevin said, pulling her close. "I am marveling. 10 years ago I was alone on this ranch with Keith, wondering if we would make it through another winter. Now look at us." Beatrice thought about the girl she had been, left behind by the wagon train and burning up with fever. She had been so scared then, so uncertain about her future. She had lost everything, her family, her plans, her sense of who she was supposed to be, but she had found something better. She had found a man who loved her unconditionally, who had stayed when everyone else left, who had built a life with her from nothing. She had found purpose and joy, and a love that had grown deeper with every passing year. "I love you," she said to Kevin, the words she said every night but meant just as much as the first time. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for letting me," Kevin replied, kissing her softly. "You are the best decision I ever made." The years rolled on. Will grew into a young man who was the spitting image of his father, tall and strong with that same gentle way with horses. He took over more and more of the ranch work, allowing Kevin to step back a bit and spend more time with the younger children. Caroline at 16 was beautiful and spirited, with a line of young men from neighboring ranches finding excuses to visit. Kevin was not thrilled about this development, but Beatrice reminded him that their daughter was sensible and they had raised her well. The twins were 14 now, still identical in appearance but completely different in personality. Jonathan wanted to be a teacher and spent all his free time reading. Samuel lived for the ranch and was already talking about expanding their operation even further. And Rose, at 7, was the baby of the family, spoiled by everyone but still sweet-natured and kind. Keith and Margaret had 4 children of their own now, and the expanded Franklin family was a force in the community. They were known as good people, hard workers, and fair dealers. On a spring evening in 1884, 17 years after Beatrice had been left behind, she and Kevin sat on the porch and watched the sunset. The children were inside, the sounds of their voices and laughter drifting out through the open windows. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if the wagon train had waited? Kevin asked. If you had made it to Oregon with your family, Beatrice considered this. She had received letters from her parents over the years. They had made it safely to Oregon and started a farm. Her father had written about how they had never forgiven themselves for leaving her, even though Beatrice had written back immediately to tell them she understood and that she was happy. I think about it sometimes, she admitted, but I cannot imagine my life any other way now. This is where I belong. With you, with our children on this land we have built together. Kevin reached over and took her hand, his fingers threading through hers in the familiar, comfortable way of people who had been together for years. His hands were more weathered now, scarred from ranch work and rough from the elements. But they were the hands that had cared for her when she was sick, that had held their babies, that had built their life. When I found you that day, Kevin said softly, sick and alone in that tent, I had no idea you would become my whole world. I thought I was just helping someone in need. I never imagined that you would be the person who made everything else make sense. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. After all these years, Kevin could still move her with his words, with his sincerity and his deep, abiding love. You saved my life, she said, not for the first time. In every way a person can be saved. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. A horse whinnied in the barn. Inside the house, Caroline was playing the piano Kevin had bought her last year, the notes drifting out sweet and clear. This was their life. Not the life Beatrice had imagined as a girl, not the safe, conventional future she had planned. This was better. This was real and hard and beautiful and entirely theirs. Will came out onto the porch, his boots heavy on the wooden boards. At 19, he was taller than his father now, with broad shoulders and his mother's kind eyes. I fixed that broken section of fence by the north pasture, he reported. Should hold through the summer at least. Good work, Kevin said. Thank you, son. Will hesitated, then said, I have been thinking. James Patterson has been talking about going to Colorado, trying to start a ranch up there. He wants to know if I would go with him as a partner. Beatrice felt her heart clench, her firstborn leaving. But she forced herself to stay calm to listen. What do you want to do? Kevin asked carefully. I want to stay here, Will said. This is home. This is where I belong. I just wanted you both to know that I have thought about other options and I am choosing this. I am choosing the Franklin Ranch. The relief on Kevin's face was obvious. That means more to me than you know, son. This land, this ranch, I have always hoped it would matter to you the way it matters to me. It does, Will assured him. I want to build my life here the way you and Mama built yours. After Will went back inside, Kevin pulled Beatrice closer. He is staying, he said softly. Our boy is staying. Of course he is, Beatrice said. This is his home. We have built something worth staying for. The summer of 1884 brought both joy and sorrow. In June, Keith died suddenly from a heart problem no one had known he had. He was only 36 years old, and his death hit the family hard. Margaret and her children moved into the main house, and the family rallied around them. Kevin took his brother's death hard. He and Keith had run the ranch together for so many years, had survived their parents' deaths, and built something strong together. He spent long nights on the porch, staring out at the darkness, trying to make sense of a world without his brother in it. Beatrice sat with him through those nights, not saying much, just being present. She knew grief, knew how it could hollow you out, and she knew that sometimes the best thing you could do was just be there. Slowly, Kevin came back to himself. He would never be quite the same, would always carry the loss of his brother, but he learned to live with it. Margaret was a strong woman, and she and her children stayed part of the Franklin family, working the ranch and keeping Keith's memory alive. In the fall of 1885, Will started courting a girl named Elizabeth Harper, whose family had recently moved to the area. She was smart and capable, with a good sense of humor, and Beatrice approved immediately. They were married the following spring, and Will built a house near Keith's old place. It was strange at first, seeing her son set up his own household, but it was also right. This was the way things were supposed to work. Children grew up and built their own lives while staying connected to the family. Elizabeth gave birth to Kevin and Beatrice's first grandchild, a little girl named Clara, in the spring of 1887. Kevin was beside himself with joy over this tiny new life, and Beatrice found herself understanding her own parents better, understanding why the decision to leave her behind had been so agonizing. Caroline married in 1888 to a banker from a nearby town. She would not be staying on the ranch, and that was all right. She was suited for a different kind of life, and her husband John was a good man who clearly adored her. The twins went in different directions as well. Jonathan became a teacher as he had always wanted, taking a position in a growing town 50 miles away. Samuel stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father and Will, talking about expanding into horse breeding as well as cattle. Rose, at 11, was still in school but already showing signs that she would be a force to be reckoned with. She was smart and determined, with a stubborn streak that reminded Beatrice of herself. In 1889, Kevin had a health scare. He collapsed one day while working in the barn, and for several terrifying hours, Beatrice thought she might lose him. But it turned out to be exhaustion and dehydration, not anything more serious. Still, it was a reminder that they were not young anymore. "Maybe I should slow down," Kevin admitted when he was recovering in bed, Beatrice sitting beside him with her hand in his. "Maybe we both should," Beatrice agreed. "We have raised our children. We have built something lasting. Maybe it is time to let the next generation take over some of the burden." Kevin nodded slowly. "I am 50 years old," he said, as if this was a revelation. "When did that happen?" "When we were busy living our lives," Beatrice said with a small smile. She was 43, with gray threading through her brown hair and lines around her eyes, but she had never felt more content. They did start to step back then, letting Will and Samuel handle more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Kevin still went out most days, but he did not push himself the way he used to. He spent more time with his grandchildren, of which there were now 4, teaching them to ride and telling them stories about the old days. Beatrice kept the household running and spoiled her grandchildren shamelessly. She also started writing down the story of how she and Kevin met, thinking that someday their children and grandchildren might want to know how the Franklin Ranch really began. On a summer evening in 1892, 25 years after Beatrice had been left behind by the wagon train, she and Kevin celebrated their anniversary. Their children had organized a party, with all the family and half the neighboring ranches showing up to celebrate. There were speeches and toasts, and Will stood up to say, "My parents built something remarkable here. Not just a ranch, though this is one of the best operations in Nebraska. They built a family, a real family based on love and hard work and sticking together no matter what. They taught us that when you commit to something, to someone, you stay. You do not leave when things get hard. You stay and you build something better." Beatrice had tears streaming down her face by the time Will sat down. Kevin wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close. "He is right," Kevin whispered in her ear. "We built something pretty amazing." "We did," Beatrice agreed. "We really did." Later that night, after everyone had gone home and it was just the two of them again, they lay in their bed and talked about the years that had passed. "Do you remember that night I asked you to marry me?" Kevin asked. "You were making biscuits." "I remember everything about that night," Beatrice said. "I was terrified. I did not know if I was making the right choice. And now I know it was the best choice I ever made." "You are the best choice I ever made." Kevin kissed her softly, tenderly, with all the love of 25 years together. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every single moment, the good times and the hard times and everything in between, all of it, as long as it was with you." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. Kevin's health remained mostly good, though he slowed down more as he got into his 50s. Beatrice developed arthritis in her hands, making some tasks more difficult, but she adapted and kept going. Their grandchildren grew and thrived. Will and Elizabeth had 3 more children. Caroline and John had 2 boys. Samuel married a rancher's daughter named Helen, and they had their first child in 1893. Even Jonathan, who had moved away to teach, came back for visits regularly, bringing his wife and eventually their children to stay at the ranch for summers. In 1895, something unexpected happened. A wagon train passed through the area, and the wagon master came to the ranch looking to buy supplies. Beatrice happened to answer the door, and she froze when she saw him. It was Samuel Hicks, the same wagon master who had refused to wait for her 28 years earlier. He was old now, his face deeply lined and his hair white, but she recognized him immediately. He did not recognize her at first. "Good afternoon, madam. I am looking for the owner of this ranch. I need to purchase some supplies for my train." "Mr. Hicks," Beatrice said quietly. "It is Beatrice Morrison, or it was. I am Beatrice Franklin now." Recognition dawned slowly on his weathered face, followed by shock. "Miss Morrison, the girl we left behind near the Platte River." "The same," Beatrice confirmed. He stared at her, taking in the nice house, the prosperous ranch spread out behind her, the sound of children playing in the distance. "You did well for yourself," he said slowly. "I did," Beatrice agreed, "though it was not exactly the plan at the time." Hicks looked uncomfortable. "I have thought about you over the years," he admitted. "Wondered what happened to you. Felt bad about leaving you behind, even though I knew it was the only choice at the time." "It was the right choice," Beatrice said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "If you had waited, I would have made it to Oregon. I probably would have ended up married to some farmer or shopkeeper, living a perfectly nice, perfectly ordinary life. Instead, I was here when Kevin Franklin found me, and we built this together." She gestured at the ranch. "I have a husband I love deeply, 5 children, 11 grandchildren, and a life I would not trade for anything. So thank you, Mr. Hicks, for leaving me behind." The old wagon master blinked rapidly, and Beatrice realized he had tears in his eyes. "I am glad something good came of it," he said gruffly. "I am glad you found your place." Kevin came around the corner of the house then, saw Beatrice talking to a stranger, and came over to join them. She introduced him to Hicks and explained their history. Kevin shook the old man's hand and said, "Thank you for not waiting. If you had, I would never have met my wife." They sold Hicks the supplies he needed, and Beatrice sent him off with fresh bread and some of her preserves. As the wagon train rolled out the next morning, she stood on the porch with Kevin and watched them go. "Are you all right?" Kevin asked. "More than all right," Beatrice said. "Seeing him reminded me of something. I spent so much time after that day thinking I had been abandoned, left behind, rejected. But the truth is I was being guided. I was being put exactly where I needed to be." "With me," Kevin said. "With you," Beatrice confirmed, leaning into his embrace. "Always with you." In 1897, they celebrated their 30th anniversary. Kevin was 55 now and mostly retired from active ranch work, though he still went out most days to check on things and offer advice. Beatrice was 50, her hands gnarled with arthritis but her spirit as strong as ever. Will was effectively running the ranch now, with Samuel as his partner. The Franklin operation was one of the most successful in Nebraska, known for quality cattle and honest dealing. They had expanded significantly, buying more land and increasing the herd. All 5 of Kevin and Beatrice's children were settled and happy. Will with his 4 children, all following in the ranching tradition. Caroline with her 2 boys, living a comfortable life in town. Jonathan with his 3 children, teaching and shaping young minds. Samuel with 2 daughters who rode horses like they were born in the saddle. And Rose, at 20, engaged to a young veterinarian who had set up practice in the area. There were 15 grandchildren now, ranging from newborns to teenagers, and the Franklin family gatherings were loud, chaotic, and full of love. On a quiet autumn evening, Kevin and Beatrice sat in their rocking chairs on the porch, watching the sun set over their land. The house behind them was still and quiet for once, all the grandchildren having gone home. 30 years, Kevin mused. 30 years since we said our vows in this very house. Best 30 years of my life, Beatrice said. Though that is not completely fair, since the first 20 were not exactly stellar. Kevin laughed, the sound warm and familiar. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if the wagon train had waited if you had made it to Oregon? Not anymore, Beatrice said honestly. There was a time when I wondered, but not now. This is my life. This is exactly where I am supposed to be. She reached over and took his hand, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. 30 years of marriage, 30 years of building a life together, and Beatrice still felt her heart flutter when Kevin looked at her a certain way. You know what I think about sometimes, Kevin said eventually. I think about that day I found you in your tent, how I almost rode past. I was checking the fence line and I almost did not investigate when I saw the tent. I almost just kept going. But you did not, Beatrice pointed out. But I did not, Kevin agreed. And that choice, that decision to see if someone needed help, it changed everything. It brought you into my life. It gave me a family and a home and a reason to keep building something worth having. The best things happen when we help each other, Beatrice said softly. You helped me when I was at my lowest. You did not ask for anything in return, you just did what was right. And look what grew from that one act of kindness. They sat on the porch until the sky was fully dark and the air had turned cool. Finally, Kevin stood and offered Beatrice his hand, pulling her to her feet with the ease of long practice. Come on, Mrs. Franklin, he said. Let me take you to bed. Beatrice smiled and let him lead her inside, through the house they had filled with love and laughter, to the bedroom they had shared for 3 decades. They undressed and climbed into bed, and Kevin pulled her close the way he did every night. I love you, he said, the words as necessary as breathing, today and always. I love you too, Beatrice replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. Thank you for staying. Thank you for letting me, Kevin said, and they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, content in the life they had built together. The years moved forward relentlessly. Kevin's health began to decline more noticeably in his late 50s. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of a body that had worked hard for decades. He moved slower, tired more easily, needed more rest. Beatrice found herself taking on the role of caretaker, making sure Kevin did not overdo it, that he took his medicine, that he rested when he needed to. It was a reversal of those early days when he had cared for her through her fever, and she was glad to be able to return the kindness. In 1900, they celebrated the turn of the century with a huge family gathering. All the children and grandchildren came, and they filled the ranch house and spilled out onto the grounds. There was food and music and dancing, and at midnight, everyone gathered to welcome the new century. Kevin stood with his arm around Beatrice, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. He had started the century as a 12-year-old boy heading west with his parents. He was ending it as a 60-year-old man with a family that had grown far beyond anything he could have imagined. "Here is to the next century," Will said, raising his glass. "May it be as good to the Franklins as this one has been." Everyone cheered and drank, and then the grandchildren were clamoring for stories about the old days, about what life had been like back in the 1860s and 70s. Kevin and Beatrice took turns telling stories about the wagon train and the fever and the early days of the ranch. They talked about the drought and the hard winters, about Keith and the early struggles. But the best part, Kevin said, his arm still around Beatrice, was finding your grandmother sick in a tent and having the privilege of spending my life with her. Everything good in my life came from that day. Beatrice had tears in her eyes. Even after all these years, Kevin could still move her with his words, with his unwavering love. Rose got married in the spring of 1901 to her veterinarian, a kind man named David Porter. The wedding was held at the ranch, and the whole community came out to celebrate. It was bittersweet for Beatrice, watching her youngest child pledge her life to someone else, but it was also right. This was what they had raised their children for, to grow up and build lives of their own. Kevin's health took a turn for the worse in the summer of 1902. He developed pneumonia, and for several frightening days, it looked like he might not pull through. But he rallied, his stubborn will keeping him alive even when the doctor had given up hope. "You are not getting rid of me that easily," he told Beatrice when he was finally on the mend. "We still have years left together." And they did have more time, but Kevin was never quite as strong after that bout of pneumonia. He stayed close to home mostly, content to sit on the porch and watch the ranch run without him. He spent hours with his grandchildren, now numbering 20 with more on the way. He taught them to whittle and told them stories and passed down the values that had guided his life. Work hard. Be honest. Help people when they need it. Stay when others leave. In the fall of 1905, Kevin celebrated his 65th birthday. It was a quiet affair, just family, and he seemed content just to be surrounded by the people he loved. 65 years, he said to Beatrice that night as they got ready for bed. "I never thought I would make it this long." "You are not done yet," Beatrice said firmly. She was 58 now, her hair completely gray and her body showing the wear of years of hard work and 5 pregnancies, but she was still the woman Kevin had fallen in love with. "No," Kevin agreed. "Not done yet. Still have things to do, grandchildren to watch grow up. More sunsets to see with you." He lived 3 more years, years filled with quiet contentment and family. He got to see Will and Elizabeth celebrate their 20th anniversary. He got to hold his first great-grandchild, Will's daughter Clara's baby. He got to watch Samuel expand the ranch even further, making the Franklin name known throughout the state. On a spring morning in 1908, Kevin woke with the sunrise and reached for Beatrice the way he did every morning. But this time, his movements were slower, more labored. "Beatrice," he said softly. She woke immediately, sensing something wrong. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am tired," Kevin said. "So tired." Beatrice felt fear clutch at her heart, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Rest then. I am here." Kevin smiled at her, and it was the same smile that had lit up his face when she agreed to marry him 41 years ago. "You have made my life so good," he said. "I want you to know that. Every single day with you has been a gift." "Kevin, do not," Beatrice said, her voice breaking. "Do not say goodbye." Not goodbye, Kevin said, reaching up to cup her face with one weathered hand. Never goodbye, just thank you. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for loving me. The doctor came, and the children were summoned, and they all gathered around Kevin's bedside. He was lucid and calm, saying goodbye to each of his children, telling them how proud he was of them. To Will, he said, "Take care of the ranch. You are doing a wonderful job. Keep building on what we started." To Caroline, he said, "You brought so much light into our lives. Never lose that brightness." To Jonathan, he said, "I am proud that you followed your own path. Keep shaping young minds." To Samuel, he said, "You have the heart of a rancher. This land is in good hands with you." To Rose, he said, "You were my baby girl. Stay strong and kind." Then he asked to be alone with Beatrice, and the children left reluctantly, knowing what was coming. "I am scared," Beatrice admitted, lying down beside him on the bed and curling into his side the way she had for 4 decades. "I do not know how to do this without you." "You are the strongest person I know," Kevin said, his voice growing weaker. "You survived being left behind in the middle of nowhere. You survived fever and childbirth and drought and everything else life threw at us. You will survive this too." "I do not want to survive it," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. "I want you to stay." "I know," Kevin said softly. "But I am so tired, love. And I have had such a good life. I have nothing to regret, nothing left undone." They lay together in silence for a while, and then Kevin said, "Promise me something, anything. Promise me you will keep living. Really living, not just going through the motions. Spend time with the grandchildren. Work in your garden. Sit on the porch and watch the sunsets. Live." "I promise," Beatrice whispered. Kevin closed his eyes, a small smile on his face. "I love you, Beatrice Franklin. Thank you for the best 41 years of my life." "I love you too," Beatrice said. "Always." He drifted off to sleep then, and an hour later, with Beatrice still curled against him, Kevin Franklin passed away peacefully. He was 68 years old, and he had lived a full, good life. The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over the state to pay their respects. Kevin had been respected and admired, known as a fair man and a good neighbor. The house overflowed with mourners, and Beatrice accepted their condolences with grace even as her heart was breaking. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he had loved so much. The headstone was simple, reading Kevin William Franklin, 1842 to 1908, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. The weeks after Kevin's death were the hardest of Beatrice's life. Harder even than being left behind by the wagon train, harder than losing Thomas in the war. She had built her entire adult life around Kevin, and without him, she felt unmoored. But she had made him a promise, and she intended to keep it. So she got up every morning and kept going. She spent time with her children and grandchildren. She worked in her garden. She sat on the porch and watched the sunsets, remembering all the times she had sat there with Kevin beside her. Will and Elizabeth suggested she move in with them, but Beatrice refused. "This is my home," she said firmly. "I am not leaving it." So she stayed in the ranch house, with family checking on her daily but allowing her the independence she needed. She kept the house the way Kevin had liked it, and she talked to him sometimes when she was alone, telling him about what was happening on the ranch with the family. A year passed. Then, too, Beatrice found a new rhythm to her life, one that honored Kevin's memory while still moving forward. She spent a lot of time with her grandchildren, and she started teaching the granddaughters to cook and sew, passing down the skills that had served her so well. She also finished writing the story of how she and Kevin met, adding in all the years that came after. She wanted her descendants to know how it had all begun, how one act of kindness had created this entire family. In 1910, Beatrice celebrated her 63rd birthday surrounded by family. There were now 25 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, and the Franklin family continued to grow and thrive. "Grandma," little Clara's daughter Emma asked, climbing into Beatrice's lap, "tell me again about how you met Grandpa." Beatrice smiled and launched into the familiar story. She never tired of telling it, of remembering that day when Kevin had found her and everything had changed. "And he just stayed and helped you?" Emma asked, her eyes wide. "Even though he did not know you, he stayed," Beatrice confirmed. "And then we built a life together. The best life I could have imagined." Beatrice lived until 1915, long enough to see Rose have her 3rd child, long enough to see the ranch expand to over 2,000 acres, long enough to see the family she and Kevin had created flourish and grow. She died peacefully in her sleep on a summer night, just slipped away quietly. She was 68, the same age Kevin had been when he died. The family liked to think they had planned it that way somehow, that they could not bear to be apart for too long. They buried her beside Kevin on the hill overlooking the ranch. Her headstone read Beatrice Lydia Franklin, 1847 to 1915, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. And beneath that, a line that Will had chosen from her written story. She was left behind, but she found her home. The Franklin Ranch continued to thrive for generations. Will's children and grandchildren kept building on what Kevin and Beatrice had started, expanding and modernizing while still honoring the values at the ranch's foundation. The story of how it all began became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The story of a woman left behind by a wagon train and the cowboy who stayed to help her, who built a life with her, who loved her until his dying day. It was a story about kindness and resilience, about choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier, about building something meaningful from nothing. It was a story about love in all its forms, romantic love and family love and the love of the land. And it was a true story, as true as anything could be, preserved in Beatrice's written words and in the memories of all the people who came after, who existed because of that day in 1867 when Kevin Franklin saw a tent and decided to investigate, when he found a sick woman and chose to help her, when he asked her to marry him and she said yes. The ranch still stands today, a testament to what 2 people can build together when they commit to each other and to a shared vision. Kevin and Beatrice Franklin's great-great-great-grandchildren work the land now, raising cattle and horses just like their ancestors did. And if you go to the ranch and climb the hill where Kevin and Beatrice are buried, you can look out over the land they built together and see their legacy stretching to the horizon. Fields and pastures, barns and houses, but more than that, a family that understands the value of staying when things get hard, of building something that lasts, of love that endures beyond death. That is the story of how a woman left behind became the matriarch of one of Nebraska's most successful ranching families. It is a story of chance and choice, of fever and fate, of a cowboy who stayed and the life he built with the woman he loved. And it is a story that will be told for generations to come. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest moments, that being left behind can actually mean being exactly where you are supposed to be.